In this podcast, two Gen Xers are taking a trip down memory lane, revisiting and reflecting on the cinema of the 1980s. We'll look at the hits and the flops, the studio blockbusters and art house indies, the critically acclaimed, and the universally reviled. The series is hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli, a writer and librarian, and features Dustin Morrow, a filmmaker, author, and professor of film. So pull on your leg warmers, crank up your boombox, and hop in the DeLorean. It's time for The Long Rewind. Welcome to The Long Rewind. I'm your host, Lisa, and with me as always is Dustin.
Hello.
And today we're here to talk to you about Stephen King movies in the 80s, adaptations of Stephen King novels and stories and whatnot.
So what was your experience with Stephen King when you were young? When did you discover him? When did you read him? What did you read? What did you think?
Well, I mean, I think my original relationship with Stephen King, especially in the 80s, was complete avoidance. I was afraid of, I was very allergic, if you will, to horror. I just was not, I was too scared to watch it or read it for the most part.
Did you ever read like kid horror like R.L. Stine or what's her name? The Flowers in the Attic. Lisa Andrews.
Not till later. I started to dip my toe into horror, both books and movies and things.
Goosebumps.
In my teens. Goosebumps was that was too late for me. I was a little too old for that. That was more my younger brothers. But R.L. Stine did do some like teen books, and I read those types of things. Like I started to get into Stephen King and things like that in my teens, like in high school, which was past the 80s at that point. So yeah, it's interesting. I did go to a bunch of sleepovers over my lifetime, probably in the later 80s and then early 90s, where I guess later 80s, where, you know, they would want to watch horror movies and Stephen King type things. And I was a little too afraid to watch them. I would kind of stay away. I do have one memory of, I don't remember because I'm sure we're going to talk about these anthology style Stephen King movies, Creepshow and Cat's Eye and all that. And which one is the one that has him turning into like a...
That's Creepshow.
That's Creepshow. I remember I was sleeping over at a friend's house and I think her mom was watching Creepshow and I was exposed to that one story of Stephen King like turning into plants basically, and it freaked me out and I still won't watch it. I just couldn't take it. So anyway, we'll talk about that. But that's kind of I love him now. I think he's a wonderful writer and the movies are great and I'm into him now, but it took growing up a little to
if you were a kid at these sleepovers and they would put on like Nightmare on Elm Street or something, what would you do?
That's a really
if they were all there watching
question.
The movie.
Because
did you hide in the bathroom or what?
I wouldn't hide in the bathroom. I think because you also have to understand, I don't know what it was like at boys' sleepovers, at girls' sleepovers. You might put a movie on, but you're still there's so many of you there that you can have little groups doing other things or everybody's talking anyway and you're not maybe paying as much attention to the movie as you could be. So I think I must have done something. I don't actually remember, but I do also know that I would see little bits of these things. So it's not that I avoided the sleepover. I still went to the sleepover. Although, they don't always tell you we're going to be watching such and such. I don't know. I just didn't look or was doing things with other friends or, it's girl sleepovers are a bit chaotic. So you're not always just sitting there watching the movie, I think. At least that's how it used to be. I don't know what it was like for boys, but.
So would you classify yourself as a King fan now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love Stephen King. I think he's a marvelous writer. I love his On Writing book. I think a lot of people do. His just book about writing. And I enjoy so many of his books now. I've read a lot of them now and I've seen a lot of the film adaptations and I just think he's great. I love him now. I'm a fan.
What was the first King you remember reading?
I think the first one I remember reading was probably The Stand because I watched...
That was a big one.
Yeah, well, I wasn't afraid of... I've never been afraid of a big book.
I think that's his longest book. Maybe.
Is it really?
Yeah, maybe,
it was in high school.
Maybe It. I don't know.
Okay.
One of those two.
I haven't read It. that was in high school is when I started to get into Stephen King. I have this memory of like choosing one Stephen King a summer to read. And I'd seen The Stand, the miniseries that was out. I think, is it Mick Garris who did The Stand? The miniseries that was out on, I don't even know what channel it was. But I watched that, and that was in the 90s, I think. And I was kind of captivated by it, just this idea of, we didn't have as much of this back then, this idea of a plague taking everyone out, and then, who's left and how that all plays out. And I remember that being really a captivating idea, and then wanting to read the book. And I had a friend who owned a lot of Stephen King, mass market paperbacks, and so she would loan me one a summer. I remember reading that one summer. I think that was the first one, The Stand. I read Needful Things one summer. Mm-hmm. I don't remember all the others, but those are the two I distinctly remember reading in the summers. So I think The Stand was the first one. Yeah. What about you? What's your Stephen King history?
My journey.
Yeah, your journey.
I remember reading it on the school bus.
And how old were you? You probably were braver than I was.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I definitely was like a tween when I started reading, like maybe junior high age.
Yeah.
And I remember reading Misery and Thinner.
Oh my gosh.
And Pet Sematary.
Wow. You were really brave.
Different seasons.
Yeah.
All the short stories, the novella collections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I was intimidated by the size of stuff like The Stand and It, so I never quite got around to those, but I read all of the shorter ones that our school library had. Mm-hmm. Kind of surprised that, do school libraries even stock all the Stephen King now, you think?
They must. It's a good
It's pretty intense. Some of it's pretty intense
stuff.
That's a good question. Looking back now, I'm sort of like, I'm a little surprised that our school library had all of those books.
And you say you were a tween, so we're talking like you're not.
Yeah,
you were like 10 to 12, kind of. That is pretty young. I'm the things you're reading, like Misery. That's a fairly. I haven't read the book. I've seen the movie. Those are some pretty adult themes. That's even more intense than I would think a supernatural Stephen King would be. So I'm impressed that you read that at such a young age. And Pet Sematary, I've seen the movie, but I hear the book is pretty horrifying. So wow,
it's very disturbing.
You were very brave.
Yeah, and I remember being scared by that one. I don't think I was scared by Misery or Thinner or any of the other ones, but I do remember reading them on the bus and being like, wanting to like turn to other people on the bus and being like, "You're not gonna believe what I just read in this book." Like, she just cut his leg off.
It's just...
She just ran over a guy's head with a lawnmower. Like all the stuff that wasn't in the movie.
I think... I didn't know she did that in the book. That's crazy. I just want to give a shout out to Stephen King as a writer, because I think people who haven't read him or don't know him I don't know that people realize that he is just such a good writer. Like it's not... He doesn't just write gross horror to freak you out. He certainly can do that, but like they're just good yarns, and his writing's excellent. Yeah,
he's definitely come around critically to where I think critics now are appreciative of him and his legacy and his writing, but there was a point in that era where he was pretty dismissed by the literary community.
Do you think in the 80s?
Something of a horror hack?
Yeah, since we're focusing on that, was that kind of where he was at in the 80s, do you think? I don't really know, but yeah.
But now I think he's generally regarded as one of our better kind of mass popular
American writers.
Yeah, and deservedly so.
Yeah, the one other thing I remember really enjoying, this was much later, this was more in like the 2000s and 2010s. I used to love his, he would do like a back page little essay in Entertainment Weekly I don't know if it was every week or every month, but I really enjoyed his writing in Entertainment Weekly for a while when Entertainment Weekly was still a good publication. Those were really fun too. Just a good writer.
Folks that we don't, because we are a film podcast, we don't spend a lot of time on literature.
Yep.
Some people may not know that you are a enormous reader, voracious reader, and books are much more your thing than movies. And
generally, movies are a close second.
So what is it you like about Stephen King in particular?
Oh man,
because you read pretty much everything.
He has a way with dialogue that is so unusual. You know, I think his characters, he can be funny and scary and very real. Like he's got very human, real characters, even when you're talking about supernatural things. And I do, like I said, I think his dialogue is usually pretty good and interesting and realistic. And I don't know. Obviously, his plots tend to be fantastic too and really take you along for quite a ride. But he also does. I mean, I guess all the things I'm saying, he tends to do everything really well. Like sense of place is always great. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know he's definitely got some things that he writes are better than others, and he's so prolific that, of course, like, you know, he's got some things that I know are not considered to be that great, but when he's great, which is a lot of the time, I think he does place and characters and plot really well, and to be able to do all those things really well, and just like his books feel like effortless reading to me, but it also doesn't feel like fluff or like stupid. It feels like there's air there. You know, you feel like it's not just pulp. There's meaning there too. So I don't know how he does it. He's kind of magical.
Yeah. He's a real master of genre mechanics too. Like just
that stuff better than I do. Yeah.
I mean, his mastery of genre writing is so good that he can subvert it. Mm-hmm. And he does that so frequently that as a reader, you kind of expect him to subvert genre, and at least I still read almost everything he puts out to this day, and that's the thing I most look forward to when I'm reading, because it's you'll look at the book and you'll have certain ideas about what you think it's going to be based on reading the summary of it, or even looking at the cover, or seeing the interviews he's doing when he's promoting it or whatever. And then it almost inevitably ends up not really exactly being that thing that you expect it to be. He's just good at surprising the reader. The other thing I love about him is he's just such an empathetic writer.
I was just going to say, he's so humane.
His characters feel really like real people.
Yeah,
they feel wholly formed, even when they're in these narratives that are really wild.
I think he's this is maybe something folks wouldn't have thought in the 80s, or if you didn't know his work, you wouldn't have thought it. He's a very humane writer, I think. I think he really loves humans and cares about them. And so even when, he's got some real horrible things happening to people in these books, but he cares about people, and they're very humane, these books. Yeah.
So I thought what we would do is, before we start digging into the cinematic output of King's oeuvre in the 80s, that we would just look at what he himself was doing and where he was in his career.
Let's hear about it.
So King blew up in the 70s. Carrie was the book that kind of announced him, although that film's success, the De Palma film, is that really fueled a sales bump on the book, and I think that the film is often attributed to kind of starting the literary career of Stephen King. So he had, by the end of the 70s, he had kind of established himself as a mass seller of books, a very popular pop writer who was maybe not so respected by, again, the literary field. So it's also the decade that he was deepest in his addictions to drugs and alcohol, and in particular, cocaine. Yeah. He has said that he barely remembers writing the book Cujo, which came out in the early 80s. He has said that the book Misery is about his coke addiction, that the character of Annie Wilkes, his quote-unquote biggest fan, who'll never let him go, who keeps him prisoner and isolated from other people, and who makes demands of his writing and what it can be and what it can't be, is coke.
Whoa.
That she is Coke.
I didn't know that. That's so interesting.
It really, like, when you hear him say that, it really can change the way you...
yeah, it's a real shift on
think,
Misery there.
Yeah.
And interesting that the book's called Misery, right? Right? I mean, if that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Addiction. Yeah. Wow.
So this is also the decade that he starts the Dark Tower series.
Okay.
Which was ongoing and which I read none of. It's one of my real blind spots in the Stephen King.
I think I read a little of that. Is
canon.
that the one with like... Yeah, I think I know what that one is.
I think it's like I saw the movie. I don't really remember anything about it. It was a terrible movie. It's kind of a post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, there's like a dark man or something,
Yeah.
kind of like a cowboyish.
Yeah, it's like a
dark
post-apocalyptic
kind of
Western
I
sort
think
of.
I might have read the first one of those. Yeah.
Yeah. So he starts writing those. He expands his genre reach a little. He does a book called The Eyes of the Dragon in 1987, which is a phenomenal fantasy book. It's one of my favorite fantasy books, actually.
We've both read that. It's
so good.
really great, yeah.
He does some short stories. He punches out a bunch of novels. He's always been extremely prolific and still is.
Yes.
And if you read his book about writing, which is called On Writing, he talks about his day-to-day writing practice.
And it is, I think, a pretty daily
which is wild. It's
thing.
like he doesn't really do writer's block.
No.
Even when he has no ideas, he forces himself to
every
write
day.
stuff. And if that stuff should all get thrown out at the end of, I think he writes 4 hours or 5 hours a
Something
day.
like that, yeah. Kind of the first half of the day.
Yeah, he has a very strict, like he's in there like by a certain time every morning and he doesn't leave that room until the end of the day.
And
until the end of
matter,
that writing period, which I think for him is like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And he's been doing this like forever, which is how he can crank out like a book or two a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's what he wrote in the 1980s. I mean, this is sort of amazing output for any writer. In 1980, he puts out Firestarter. In 1981, Roadwork, which is he puts out under his pseudonym Richard Bachman.
I mean, that's wild too, right? That he's basically like writing like two people.
Yeah.
He's got Richard Bachman and himself.
Yeah, I found those books. Those were collected later into an anthology called the Bachman Books.
Right.
And I remember having that as a kid and reading those.
Yeah.
That Roadwork has actually been out of print forever. It's about a school shooting.
Oh, yeah.
Came out in 1981. Okay. So talk about being ahead of
a lot of people talk about his prescience. I think it's his empathy more than prescience. I think he just gets people. But yeah.
So in 1981, Roadwork comes out. He also puts out Cujo, the book he claims not to remember writing.
That's wild.
In 1982, he puts out The Running Man. That's also a Bachman book. And then starts the Dark Tower series with the gunslinger. 1983 is a big year. He puts out Christine. Wow. He puts out Pet Sematary, which is a book he has claimed that he wrote and then put in a drawer for like a year or two because he thought he had gone too far.
Yeah.
And it is a really disturbing book and full of it's bleak and dark and you can see why he thought that.
Yep.
He also puts out a book called Cycle of the Werewolf, which we'll talk about later, becomes Silver Bullet.
Yeah.
Have you seen Cycle of the Werewolf, the book?
I haven't read the book. No, I've
It's really short.
Yeah.
And
it seems like a novella, maybe.
Yeah, it's essentially a novella.
Yeah.
It's barely even that. It's like a short story formatted to fill out a book, and it's full of illustrations.
Oh, no, I haven't.
It's also when I was in high school, I took French class.
Yes,
and by my senior year, they were offering pre-calculus. And all my classmates wanted to take that. It was at the same time as French. And I was like, no, I want to take French because if I knock out 4 years of French in high school, I don't have to take any in college, which is the way the University of Iowa works or worked at that time.
Right.
You get you have to take 2 years at Iowa. And if you take every 2 years in high school counts as a year in college.
So you were able to.
So I wanted to take 4 years.
Okay.
So anyway, there were only 2 of us in
the French class.
In French in my senior year. And so she was like, not so interested in teaching, I think, to students. So she would like just give us stuff. And so she gave us a all French translation of Cycle of the Werewolf, I remember.
She gave you a French translation of it?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And my French was pretty bad, which is sad after 3 years of having taken it. I wasn't the greatest student of French. So my classmate transcribed it.
Okay.
Translated it, I should say. And I drew the illustrations for her translation. Okay. So she did a French to English translation of Cycle the Werewolf, and I drew pictures of a werewolf and somehow got credit for the course. Anyway, that was
you worked it. You knew how to work it, I guess.
Anecdote. But anyway, in 1984, he writes The Talisman.
Okay.
That's a collaboration with Peter Straub. I think it might have been his first collaboration with Peter Straub, who he went on to collaborate with further later. He puts out the aforementioned Eyes of the Dragon, also in 1984, and he writes Thinner, which is one of my favorite Stephen King books.
Yeah, I've never read
He did that one
but
under the name Bachman. Mm-hmm. Thinner was I don't think we'll talk about it because I think it came out in the 90s. But the film really messed it up. Like it has this very cartoony tone to it. But the movie is, the book is great.
Yeah, I should read it. I haven't read it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a guy who gets cursed by this gypsy after he runs down another gypsy.
Oh, I see.
And he gets away with it because he's a good old boy and he's got friends in the local legislature. And so he gets off, and the head gypsy curses him. And also curses the judge and the attorney, and with different curses. And their curses are even worse than the main characters. But the main characters is that he loses weight to the point where he would waste away and die.
Got it. Yeah.
And he tries to get them to reverse it. And when they refuse, he calls in his friend who is a mafia hitman.
Whoa.
And halfway through the book, it turns into this like mafia versus gypsies battle. And it's so a good example again of like, you think you know what the book's going to be, and then it becomes like this other thing halfway through.
Wow. Sounds fun.
All of which I think happens naturally for Stephen King, because from what if I remember right, even in writing, I think he mentions that he doesn't work off outlines.
Yeah, I don't think
he just starts writing and he doesn't always know where things are going to go.
He just lets it take him along.
It kind of makes sense that his books will often take left turns.
Yeah. He makes it work usually, but that's...
I mean, it doesn't always though.
No,
like sometimes
it doesn't always
sometimes
work.
His books, like the third acts will be like pretty kind of disappointing. And I think maybe if he worked off outlines, that wouldn't happen, but he also probably wouldn't write as well.
It seems to work for him. So.
Yeah. So 1986, he writes It, which is an 1,100 page brick of a book.
Yeah.
1987, he puts out The Dark Tower 2.
Okay.
He puts out Misery and The Tommyknockers. And then he finishes up the decade. So nothing in 1988. And then he finishes up the decade in 1989 with The Dark Half, which is a book about killing Richard Bachman, essentially.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, have you read it?
No.
It's sort of like what would happen if your pen name, your nom de plume, came to life as a separate person from you and tried to destroy you.
Ooh, I love that. That's great. That's the dark half, I guess. It's the other half of you. Wow.
Yeah,
that's pretty
sort
cool.
of interesting.
I like it.
He also put out like some short story collections.
Okay.
He put out different seasons in 1982, which was actually, those are more like novellas. That was a big literary source because the 3 of the 4 novellas became movies.
Oh, full movies?
Yeah,
not just
The Body became Stand By Me. Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption became The Shawshank Redemption. And Apt Pupil became a movie called Apt Pupil.
Right.
Crazily enough, the 4th, for anybody who's read different seasons, it's the 4th novella, the one that hasn't been made into a movie, that everybody remembers, because it's truly one of the most shocking, wildest things he's written. It's a novella called The Breathing Method.
Okay.
Have you read this thing?
I haven't. No.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't really want to spoil it for you. It's just to say that it hinges on an idea that is truly demented and crazy.
Wow.
which is one of the things Stephen King does best. I mean, like a lot of his short stories are like this, right? Because they'll just be, you can tell like he's like, I don't think this is a whole book, but I have this idea that's so twisted that I just have to get it out there. I can't remember what it's called, but he has there's a short story he has where a guy is like wrecked on a desert island and he's injured and he can't move. And so he eats himself to stay alive. He just like, I think starts from his feet and kind of eats his own body.
Oh boy.
There's that one about the finger.
This is one I was
it's like a 10-foot finger that comes out of a guy's sink in his bathroom.
Drain, yeah.
And tries to kill him.
Yeah, you've mentioned that one to me. It sounds
that was, I mean, I remember
wild.
reading that and just being like, whoa, this is, you just want to like grab the next person you run into and be like, you got to see this. It's that kind of.
Which I think is what you did with me. You were like, this thing is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, let's look at the movies.
Okay.
So going year by year, the year opens with a bang, although not for King himself, but for the world of cinema, with The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. Comes out in 80. And of course, famously, the story everybody knows is that King himself hates this movie. Hates it so much that, you know, a decade plus later, he got a network to pony up the cash to make a mini series that he wrote based on the book. Which wasn't very good.
That was also Mick Garris. Is that
it was
right?
Mick Garris, who is by all accounts like one of the nicest guys in Hollywood, but who I haven't liked a single thing he's made. I don't know. I just find that he kind of sucks the character out of stuff that he makes. I don't know.
Do you want to talk about The Shining and what?
I mean, what's left to say about Kubrick's The Shining? I mean, it's a masterpiece. It's a weird movie. It is absolutely more of a Kubrick movie than it is a King movie, for sure.
Yeah. That's what I've heard said. I haven't read the book, The Shining, so I can't speak to that. But my understanding is it's a lot colder. At least it doesn't have any warmth or something to it that the book does.
Well, and I think...
Which makes sense. It's a cold movie.
I think King's biggest criticism of it is totally true, which is that the Nicholson character in the book,
the main character,
Jack Torrance, starts out sane, and by the end of the book, he's insane.
He has an arc, like a character
and in
should.
The Shining, at least the way Nicholson plays him, he's pretty crazy, or he's close to being like fully insane at the beginning.
And wrong. Yeah.
And so there's no character arc there.
Right.
I mean, there is, because he goes completely,
he goes from crazy to craziest.
Off the rails. He goes from like crazy to like really crazy instead of like a guy who's like trying hard to be a normal person. I mean, he's, as the book starts, he's got a drinking problem and he's broken his son's arm while in a drinking fit, and he's seeking, as the book opens, to atone for that.
Right.
And so it's meant to be like this redemption story for him, but of course it goes the other way. You know, he's overtaken by guilt and all these other feelings that are exacerbated by being isolated up at this hotel.
And by the hotel being...
And by the hotel itself being...
evil and haunted. Yeah, it is an amazing movie. It's quite a spectacle. It's one of few movies I remember seeing kind of as a young adult and being actually scared by like some of the imagery. And
there's a movie, really there's scary. A feature-length documentary that came out a few years ago called like Room 1114 or whatever that room is that's in the movie.
Yeah.
And the whole documentary is just people's weird theories about The Shining, like seeing strange things. Like, I can't remember what any of them are.
About the film,
I frankly couldn't get through that movie, but it's just like the craziest stuff. It's like, if you look into the pattern of the carpet, you'll actually see that it maps perfectly with Vietnam, like with maps of Vietnam. And so it's got to be a movie about Vietnam. It's just like, it's really wild kind of stuff that like, I'm sure Kubrick would like laugh his ass off if he heard people. But a lot of people have a lot of weird theories about The Shining.
It's a captivating film for sure.
Yeah. The lady in the bathtub is
that's a lot of people's creepiest moment, I think, for sure.
And there's a scene where there's like an old man who's like giving oral pleasure to like a rabbit. A guy in like a rabbit suit or something.
I do not remember that.
It's just and the twins.
I'm okay with not remembering that. Yeah, the twins, the blood in the elevator,
Oh yeah, the blood coming out of the elevator.
Yeah.
My favorite thing in that movie is that tracking shot that follows the kid on his little 3-wheel trike as he bikes around the hotel, and you hear him go onto carpet and off a carpet repeatedly in the shot.
Very good sound design.
The shot's like a couple minutes, and it's just the sound is so
sound design.
Kind of mesmerizing.
I love the snowy labyrinth at the end, and it's real creepy, that movie.
So that's in 80. There's nothing in 81, but in 82, Creepshow comes out, which is his collaboration with George Romero, who by many accounts is Stephen King's favorite filmmaker.
Oh, well, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
King he did a cameo in Romero's movie Night Riders.
Oh.
Which is a really weird epic length movie about a traveling, I don't know what you call it.
Are they like a motorcycle gang?
It's almost like a Renaissance fair, but they're like they dress like knights.
Yeah.
And they have a court.
Yep.
And there's like a king and that presides over these jousts and sword fights and stuff, but everything's done on motorcycles instead of horses.
Right. Yeah. You get the sense that it's like someone just wanted to do jousting on motorcycles in a movie, right?
Ed Harris plays the King Arthur character.
Oh, he's a good
and it
character.
actually follows like court intrigue amongst this like group of Renaissance players that go from small town to small town in the South, putting on this
jousting
show.
On
it's like 2.5 hours, and
the movie is 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
wow.
and it takes itself dead serious.
Wow.
It's one of those movies that was on HBO constantly when I was a kid, and I was way too young to understand like what it was trying to get at. I'm not sure I would even get at it today or understand it today, but.
I sort of love the idea. I feel like it might be fun, but that is long.
It's interesting. It's a weird, interesting movie. Anyway, King has a cameo as the thing that King always played, which is like a rube.
Yeah.
Like a country rube.
Yeah.
Like a bumpkin.
Yeah, that tends
for whatever
to be
reason.
What he likes
that's
to
who
play.
Stephen King always played in all these movies.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
He would always have some broad, comedic, usually pretty cringy cameo appearance in these things.
Well, in Creepshow, it's not a cameo, right? He's the whole...
No, he's full on the lead in one of
the one that I won't watch.
So Creepshow is takes the format of a comic book, like a classic horror comic.
Yeah.
And so it's
an anthology film.
Yeah, it's an anthology film, and it's pretty tongue-in-cheek and pretty comedic and pretty broad. But it's a real cult classic, and people love it. And it spawned a sequel and a TV show that came out some number of years ago, and I think is still on.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
which is
that.
headed by Greg Nicotero, who's one of the top makeup effects, like
people
special
in the
effects
biz.
makeup guys in Hollywood. He's kind of a legend in that industry. And he produces it. You've seen Creepshow, right?
I think I won't watch the one that
With
Stephen King. I just can't. I mean, I realize it's probably very silly, but it's very body horror, and just I have a real hard time with weird body horror, and it creeps me out. So I just kind of refuse to watch that. Sorry, Stephen King. But I think I might have seen, it looks like The Crate is maybe, I think I might have seen that. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, that's Adrian Barbeau and Hal Holbrook.
Yeah,
there's like a monster in a crate, and Hal Holbrook sees tricking his wife into getting near it so that it will kill her. Right,
because they're supposed to like feed it or something.
Yeah.
I forget what else is in Creepshow, the first one.
There's Leslie Nielsen thinks his wife is cheating on him with Ted Danson, and has Ted Danson buried up to his head on the beach, and then the surf is coming in to drown him.
And he's watching him on TV or something.
He's got a camera on him.
Ted Danson's head, like getting,
Yeah.
buffeted by waves. It's pretty wild. Yeah, that's
There's
good.
one set
That's really good.
in an airplane, like a World War II scene, I think.
Oh, in Creepshow?
Yeah, I think so. It's been a long time since I've seen it.
The one I remember the best is actually the Ted Danson one. For what I think it's just that image of him on the TV with the waves and he's buried, and I don't know. Yeah.
So that's 82, and then 83 is a huge year for King adaptations. Cujo comes out, The Dead Zone comes out, and Christine.
Yeah.
And I think you've seen all three of these, right?
I haven't seen Cujo. I've seen you seeing it. I've seen parts of it. I've definitely seen The Dead Zone and Christine, though, and they're both fantastic. They're both so good.
Yeah. So Cujo is directed by this kind of journeyman director of genre movies and exploitation movies named Louis Teague, who famously directed a cult classic called Alligator, the John Sayles movie.
Yep.
He also went on to, I believe he directed The Jewel of the Nile.
Oh, okay.
So he made some bigger stuff, but so he did Cujo, which is kind of a book about divorce.
Okay.
And
Cujo's a rabid dog, right? For those who don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's about this marriage that has disintegrated.
Okay.
And the son and the mother character get stranded out at this house where their car won't start, and they're sitting in the baking sun getting roasted alive while this dog refuses to let them exit.
Yeah, they can't get out of the car.
Right? It's a Saint Bernard that's been bitten by a bat and has gone rabid. And it's pretty well done considering that they had to use a real dog. Yeah, who was probably a very trained sweetheart of the dog, and they had to make that dog seem really terrifying. And Saint Bernards, even though they're large, are not exactly like the dog you would think of immediately.
You don't think of them as scary dogs. I'm sure they can have their moments, but usually they're considered pretty cuddly.
Yeah, so it's actually really well done. It's as you might expect, a really claustrophobic. Yeah, the whole movie is essentially set inside that car. Right. And you can it does a good job of making you feel the sun beating down on that car. Like the kid eventually gets heat stroke. Ugh, it's Danny Pintaro from Who's the Boss? From Who's the Boss?
So we got a lot of 80s going on here. Yeah. Oh,
he's a little annoying because he I mean, I know this is bad to say, but he cries a lot and he's really shrill. His performance is shrill. Right. So, I mean, it's part of it's part of the effect of the movie in that it's really grating. Right. And it kind of should be. Yeah. It's not it's an effective movie. It's not a super pleasurable.
I think this might be why I haven't watched it, because you told me about it and I was like, yeah, I get it. I'm not sure I need to see that. But that is what's interesting to me about it, is my concept of Cujo was like just about the dog, but it sounds like the scarier thing is the fact that they're trapped in this hot car and just roasting. Like, it's not even, obviously the dog is scary, which is why they won't get out of the car. But like the car is almost the scarier part.
Well, the house is right there. That's the thing.
And they can't get to it. Yeah.
They're like 20, 30 feet from the front door. And it's not until the kid kind of has heat stroke and starts to die that she finally is like, I gotta go no matter what. Because she does make attempts to get out of there. Right. And the dog every time forces her back into the car.
I think that's what I didn't realize about Cujo, was that was kind of the premise. Yeah. But it's interesting.
So then The Dead Zone is a movie by David Cronenberg. Mm-hmm. Maybe his first big kind of mainstream Hollywood movie, I think, because he was famous for making he's Canadian and making these pretty graphic exploitation movies in Canada.
Things that would be hard for me to watch, probably.
But I think Scanners might have predated this. That's the movie that has the famous scene where the guy's head blows up. Right. Michael Ironside makes the guy's head explode. Right. And I'm trying to remember when Videodrome came out, but it was somewhere around here. Yeah. That was kind of a big breakthrough movie for him too. But The Dead Zone is not body horror, which was sort of the first.
It's very low key in that respect.
Cronenberg non-body horror movie, and of course he went right after this. He sort of went back to doing that because he made The Fly.
Yeah, that's the big movie he's known for.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, it is.
It's so sad. It's a really sad movie. Yeah. I'm amazed at how kind of gray and wintry and depressing it is. And it is. And Christopher Walken.
He plays the lead.
The lead, and if you don't know it, he plays a character that's in an accident, and when he wakes up from a coma,
a car accident, yeah,
some long time later, like years later,
like decades, I think,
yeah,
or maybe at least a decade, yeah.
He has this gift, if you want to call it that. When he touches people, he can see how they're going to die or how someone near them is going to die. Mm-hmm. And it's really well written, and Walken is, I think, never been better than he is in this movie.
He's great in it,
and,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's just, he's great at conveying how much of a curse this thing is and how it isolates him from the world. And it's really sad that his fiance has moved on without him.
Yeah.
While he's been in this coma.
Yeah. It's a very human story. I mean, there's definitely some supernatural stuff to it, and there's a little sort of political kind of stuff to it. But yeah, it's great.
Yeah, there's a very like Donald Trump-like figure played by Martin Sheen.
I mean, there's been others like that through
this
history.
This autocrat who uses nefarious means to get into power and then intends to use nuclear weapons.
He's sort of
and the only person that knows that this guy is going to do this is the Walken character.
Yeah, so it's a question of what's he going to do about it, and we won't give it away. But there's also, I'm reminded, if you've ever watched Christopher Walken on Saturday Night Live, I remember one of his famous appearances, probably from the 90s. He does a whole Dead Zone sketch, a funny version of the Dead Zone where he's like predicting really mundane things for people, but like in a very dramatic way. I think that was in the like Tim Meadows.
Did you ever see the series?
No, there was a series. No,
yeah, it ran for years. Anthony Michael Hall is the lead character. It was kind of a bit of a comeback role for him as a straight dramatic part. It was on for years. I think it was on like maybe the USA Network or something.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Or Showtime. And it was on cable.
Okay.
Yeah, it was around for a while. And then, so the end of 83 is Christine.
Mm-hmm. Ugh, I love Christine. It's so good.
Even though famously a King book, it's called John Carpenter's Christine, because John Carpenter also, of course, always took a possessory credit on
is that what you call that?
All of his movies.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's John Carpenter's Christine. But hey, it should be.
It's so good.
If you can say that, like, that The Shining is more of a Kubrick movie than it is a King movie, like Christine is more of a Carpenter thing than it is a King thing.
Do you feel like it's a good marriage, though, of King and Carpenter as opposed to the Kubrick one?
I actually haven't read Christine. I do know that there are a number of changes that are made. There's like in the book, there's a corpse that lives in the back seat, essentially, that like kind of taunts and haunts Arnie, the main character, through the whole book. And that's all gone.
Right.
But it's a great movie. It's really a movie about this nerd that's this geeky character, this high school kid that gets pushed too far, really. I mean, it's kind of ahead of its time in some ways and stuff that's been done since. But it's very much in line with like Carrie in that way, right? It's this ostracized kid who finally can't take it, and Christine, this car that he buys becomes a vehicle, pun intended, for his expressing his anger and his outrage.
And it's like he gets a little power or a little encouragement kind of from the car, right? And that he kind of turns into a bit of a monster, right? It's like the little bit of power, the little bit of encouragement.
Yeah.
He's kind of in love with the car, and the car is manipulating him, right? Or at least that's my take from the movie. Lots of really amazing imagery and effects in that movie. Like, so good.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite Stephen King movies.
Yeah, I agree. It's so good.
And that's probably because of Carpenter and because I'm such a huge Carpenter fan, and it's full of great Carpenter stuff. Like the score is amazing. It's got these unbelievable shots of, like, there's a sequence where Christine has a gas station is blown up and Christine's on fire.
Yeah.
And she's following this guy, this one of the bullies down the middle of this road, this out in the middle of nowhere, and it's completely dark except for the car lighting the street.
Yes.
And the music is this propulsive synth score as the car is creeping down after this guy who's for some reason running down the middle of the street.
It's a wonderful image. Also, when Christine gets like the bullies maybe like kind of bash her up, right?
Yeah.
And then she comes back to life and you watch it happen, and it's especially for a 1983 movie, it's an astonishing effect.
Yeah, the car restores itself to its former
amazing
shape.
Yeah, it's so good. And I actually think the lead actor, whose name I'm not remembering,
Keith Gordon,
who I think becomes a director later on.
Yeah, they both did. Both of the lead actors, John Stockwell and Keith Gordon, became pretty successful filmmakers in their own right.
But I really like him in that part. I think he's
great.
Quite good.
He was a big. He was in Dressed to Kill.
Oh, okay.
So I've seen him in interviews where he credits like De Palma and Carpenter for really teaching him how to direct.
Ooh, what an education!
Observing those two guys. Yeah,
he's great in it. I think I agree with you. It's probably one of my favorite Stephen King's.
So that's 83. Then 84 is Children of the Corn and Firestarter. Mm-hmm. Two of the most probably critically lambasted of the King adaptations, but both of which have. Well, Firestarter has never really found traction. Children of the Corn is a definite cult classic.
Is that the one? Is Linda Hamilton in that?
And Peter Horton.
Okay, so I'm thinking of the right one. Okay.
Yeah, it's based on a short story about this small town in Iowa where the kids have all uprisen and killed all the adults because they are worshiping some kind of demonic entity that lives out in the cornfields, which they call He Who Walks Behind the Rows. And
I don't think I realized
it's not a very good movie. I mean, it's bad, but it's it's a lot of fun.
It is. I have seen the movie.
It's very low budget. It was an early New World Pictures movie. Mm-hmm. So that studio did not have a lot of money, and you can kind of tell. But man, did it live on. I mean, it launched more sequels than almost any other horror film. I think there have been 11 of these or something like that by this point.
Wow.
A couple of remakes and it stuck around. It was a potent movie in my childhood because I grew up in rural Western Illinois, which is all cornfields.
Yeah, they were like right next to your house.
So my friends and I made a game of this movie at Weenie Roasts. We would play Children of the Corn, and essentially somebody would be kind of elected Malachi, who's the redheaded henchman character played by Courtney Gaines in the movie, and would hunt the other kids who would hide in the cornfields. Yeah. Which, between this and Dark Night of the Scarecrow, which is a TV movie that I will talk about in our TV movie episode of our podcast. There was a lot of nefarious and scary stuff lurking in those cornfields across the street from my house.
Yeah, no kidding. I remember, I've seen this once, and I remember thinking, I mean, obviously it's not great, but there's some striking stuff in it. And I remember thinking, you could totally see that Linda Hamilton was like going places. Like she was good in it. And there was that really weird looking kid. Not the Courtney Gaines one. That there's like
the main kid. Who was a man.
Was the grown person who's
playing a kid. And it's because they cast like essentially an adult in that part that it's very unsettling.
It's very unsettling.
Yeah, because he does look like a kid. He just doesn't sound or carry himself like a kid.
He carries himself like kind of an adult. Yeah. So there's some striking things about it. I don't remember it super terribly well, but
so have you seen Firestarter, the original Firestarter?
I haven't. I only have that image in my. Drew Barrymore's in this, right? A very young Drew Barrymore, and I have images of her, with wind blowing around her hair, starting fires with her mind.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
I have images of that in my head just from promos and stuff, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's her and David Keith from Officer and a Gentleman, and Heather Locklear plays her mom. Oh, okay. And George C. Scott plays the guy who's tracking her from the government, trying to hunt her down.
Right.
I think he's supposed to be Native American.
Oh my.
Okay. So taking hey, the 80s.
Right.
it was directed by a guy named Mark Lester, who also did Commando and Class of 1984, which is one of my favorite exploitation movies of the
movie.
80s. So a real solid kind of action genre director who unfortunately never really went on to do anything much bigger than this stuff. But I think Firestarter was kind of a bomb and not looked well upon by critics, and it's not great. I like it, but it's a very weird movie, and frankly, adorable though she may be, Drew Barrymore is not the right kid.
I see. She just wasn't.
She doesn't look. I mean, they put her in all
or...
they put her in, like you said, her hair is whipping around, and instead of looking like somebody who is causing everything to explode in flame out of her rage and anger, frustration, she looks like somebody who's, I don't know, waiting for lunch, or I don't know. She doesn't
seem intimidating.
She doesn't carry it well, and she's not old enough and like mature enough an actor to bring off the dark parts of that.
I mean, that's tough, right? Because it is supposed to be a child, like a pretty young child, right?
It is.
So, like,
I mean, there are child actors that are great
that you think
and who could probably
that,
do it. Like, you know, like a little Anna Paquin would have been able to do it, or Tatum O'Neal or something. I mean, I just think like Drew Barrymore was not. She was maybe too young and maybe not a good enough actor to do it. I mean, having said that, the screenplay didn't like do her any favors. So.
Have you read the original?
I haven't read Firestarter. I'd like to read it though. It's such an interesting premise.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But yeah. So then 85 is Cat's Eye and Silver Bullet. So Cat's Eye is an anthology movie.
Yeah.
Unlike Creepshow, it's not really played for laughs, although there is some real dark comedy in it. The three stories are. The first one is James Woods plays a guy who is trying to quit smoking, and he goes to a company that's supposed to kind of police you and force you to quit smoking, only to find out that company is run by the mafia. And
their methods
they have
are pretty
extreme methods of making you not smoke.
Yeah.
It's a great kind of high wire performance by Woods. He's really electric in it. You can feel every bead of sweat on his face.
It's good. I remember finding it really compelling.
Yeah. I think it's
story.
Alan King is like the head guy.
Oh yeah, I think that's right.
And then the middle story is Robert Hayes from Airplane and the TV Starman is a tennis pro who's having an affair with this guy's wife, and the guy finds out about it and tells him that he can have her if he can make it his way around the top of this hotel in Las Vegas along the ledge.
Yeah.
So he has to walk completely around 360 degrees all the way around this hotel, just walking along this like 6-inch ledge.
Is that guy also a mobster?
I think it's like implied, but I'm not sure it's exactly stated. But he's a nefarious guy.
Yeah.
And he does like all this stuff to try to knock him off the ledge while he's doing it. So it's not just that can he keep his balance. It's like he's like throwing things at him and like all this stuff. And then the third story is Drew Barrymore again. As a little girl who's there's like a little troll goblin guy that lives in her walls of her room who it comes out at night and tries to kill her by suffocating her.
Yeah.
And she's defended by her cat.
Yeah.
And this cat actually is in the other two stories too. The cat kind of ties the three stories together in a really loose way.
Hence the title, I think. Yeah.
I don't know if this movie has any reputation today. I don't think it's well known enough to even be considered a cult classic. I kind of enjoy it. I kind of like all three
Cat's Eye
stories, especially the first two.
Yeah. I remember thinking the third one was a little less interesting.
It's
and a little cheesier.
It's hurt by some bad
the effects aren't great for today. But the first two are quite compelling and definitely keep you interested. Yeah.
Yeah. So then Silver Bullet comes out.
Yay.
Which is one of Lisa's favorite
I love Silver
80s
Bullet.
movies. Why don't you just tell the good folks what you love about Silver Bullet?
What I love about Silver Bullet. Well, I just think it's actually kind of a sweet story. I'm almost less interested in the supernatural, scary part of the story than I am all of the rest of it. It's a
werewolf story. It's based on Cycle the Werewolf.
Yeah. I didn't know if I should say that, but it's a werewolf story.
It's like set in the autumn in this small New England town, and it's about a couple of siblings, a little boy in a wheelchair and his older sister, and how they deal with this werewolf that kind of invades their town for the season.
And like they're having a hard time, or they don't really think anyone's going to believe them, and
they figure out who it is.
They figure out who it is, and they get their uncle, who's played by a wonderful Gary Busey, to help them.
Yeah, it's you and I watched this recently, and
we watch it yearly. I think at least. Yeah,
I remember thinking, having seen it a million times and finding sort of new things to look at every time I watch it, just being kind of amazed at how great Busey was.
Yeah.
I don't know if we might have discussed this movie in
I think we
that year's podcast, but just saying it was kind of a bummer that he had that motorcycle accident because he was a real commanding, interesting screen presence. And this is like the last work I think he was doing before.
Oh, is that right?
It's among that. I think it was pretty...
I mean, he's okay when he does Point Break, right? And that's like 91, 90.
Yeah.
I don't think he had his accident at that point. But anyway, we're talking about a period that was before that. So it's a bummer.
Yeah. He's great in it.
I also remember thinking just about everybody else in that movie is actually quite good.
Yeah, Corey Haim is great. He was a great child actor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And Megan Follows.
Love Megan Follows, my Anne of Green Gables. Yep. She's wonderful in it. And also, isn't Terry O'Quinn in it?
Yeah.
He's great.
He plays the local cop.
And then there's that guy, I don't actually know his name, but the guy who plays the father of the boy who gets killed. And
I don't know his name either. He's amazing.
He gives this like amazing performance, discovering the child. You don't see the child's body. But,
it's lovely. Harrowing. The score is really lovely. I think it's one of those movies that has just a real amazing sense of place.
Yeah,
and that's
very
probably
great
the thing I love most about it.
I love that about it too.
It really feels like a New England town in the autumn, and it's very haunting in a weird way.
Yeah, I love it. It's so great.
So then in '86 is Maximum Overdrive and Stand By Me, which is funny because it may be in that one year the worst and best,
the sublime and the ridiculous, perhaps
King adaptations. Yeah. So, Maximum Overdrive was the only movie that Stephen King ever directed.
Right.
He, by his own admission, was coked out of his brain while he was making it, and you can kind of tell when you're watching it. It's based on a short story he wrote called Trucks. Like the Earth passes through a tail of a comet, which for some reason makes every mechanical device on the planet want to murder us.
Yep.
Including a bunch of semi-trucks,
kind of like
which
The Happening,
surround a
but with
gas
trucks.
station or a diner and trap all these people inside it. And that's essentially the movie. It's Emilio Estevez is the lead character. Stephen King has described the movie as a moron movie. That's what he calls it, the moron movie. Mm-hmm. So he knows what it is. It's the score is by AC/DC, which is Stephen King's favorite band.
He must have had so much fun.
Stephen King, if you don't know, writes. He does all his writing to heavy metal.
Yeah, he's a big metalhead.
Big metal, so he blasts heavy metal in his office while he's writing every morning, which is wild.
I couldn't do it, but
it
works for him, obviously.
It's just a almost indescribably stupid movie. And some people really love it for its stupidity.
Well, do you want to tell folks about at least one blank square? There's so many blank squares in this movie, but
it's one the first act. It kind of once it gets in the diner and they get isolated in the diner, it actually gets pretty boring. But
but there's some kind of cool stuff.
But the first act, when all the machines are first turning on the people, is crazy. Like people getting chased by lawnmowers. Yeah. There's a scene with a Coke machine that's firing cans of Coke at little kids.
At a Little League game.
At a Little League team. Yeah. So it's just stuff like that.
The most memorable part of that movie is probably that wildness. Yeah.
On the other end of the quality spectrum is Rob Reiner's Stand By Me, which everybody knows. And so there's not much we need to say about it other than it's one of the great coming of age movies
and
ever.
It's just beloved, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I was about those kids' age when it came out, and so it was just it was a movie that came out shortly after like it was kind of in between. I think it came out in between The Goonies and Monster Squad.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
And there were a number of these. There was like one on the Wonderful World of Disney, the Disney Sunday night movie. There was one called The Brat Patrol. There were just a lot of these movies about like groups of kids. Ruskies was another one, like the groups of young boys on adventures. And this was the most kind of serious. And even though it was a period piece, like set in the 60s, the one that felt the most real and true.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a movie that meant a lot to me when I was young and that I have a lot of affection for. And I think it's just unbelievably well acted.
Oh, yeah.
And I love, it's a small thing, but I love Richard Dreyfuss's voice as a narrator.
It's so rare to get a story where the framing device works so
at the end of the at the end of the story when he's talking about what happened to the River Phoenix character and his tragic loss, and he's kind of sitting in his car out in the middle of the country, and it's just something very haunting and affecting about it. Yeah,
it is one of those. I feel like you often see a movie with a framing device like that where you're like, why did they bother? But it really totally works in this movie very, very well. Also a little haunting later on when you watch it and you know what happens to River Phoenix in the end, but the actual person. But it's such a beloved movie. It's one of those movies that back in the 80s when you were a kid, you didn't realize, most of us, I didn't realize it was a Stephen King piece until later in my life.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of us
it's
didn't know.
Like, it might be, I think it is the first film adaptation of King that wasn't horror.
Oh yeah, that seems right. It's a beautiful movie. I think it's in the National. Is it in? Oh no, I think of something else.
The National Film Registry.
I wondered if it was.
It is.
It might be.
And while I think, I mean, I strongly disagree with this. I think there's actually multiple films better, but I think generally the given opinion among most people is that The Shawshank Redemption is the best King movie because it's the best movie ever made. At least according to IMDb.
Okay.
It's the highest rated movie.
I didn't know that.
I think Stand By Me is by leaps and bounds the superior film.
I'd believe it.
Kiefer Sutherland is so great in it.
He is great in it. Everybody's great in that movie. Who's
Feldman
not good in that
is
movie?
great.
Yeah.
Weirdly, Corey
Everybody.
Feldman. Yeah, it's like easy
All
to forget that like
kids.
once upon a time Corey Feldman was also a pretty good little child actor.
Yeah, literally, I don't think there's probably not really a bad performance in that movie.
No.
They're all so great.
So that was 86. So 87 is Creepshow 2 and The Running Man. Creepshow 2 is, of course, a sequel to Creepshow, and it's another like 3 short stories. And it's pretty bad.
I'm not sure I've seen this one.
It's not worth seeing.
Yeah.
There's one story in it that people tend to remember. It's like this, there's like this monster. Some kids go out to this lake and they swim out to one of those freestanding docks out in the middle of the lake.
Yeah.
And they get stranded out there because they're surrounded by this monster that is floating in the lake that looks kind of like an oil slick.
Oh, okay.
And even that story is not particularly well done, but it's such a weird idea that I think it kind of sticks with people. And I've certainly remembered it. But the other stories are unbelievably lame and pretty bad. The Running Man, I think, is a lot of fun. That's another one that it is almost nothing like the book.
Okay.
I just read this book again
I've
recently,
not seen
like within the last 6 months.
Seen it or read the book, so I don't know a lot about it.
You've never seen The Running Man?
No.
Really?
Yeah.
It's in the same way that we were seeing the Kubrick and the Carpenter thing, like The Running Man is a total Schwarzenegger movie. It looks and feels and is exactly like the kind of stuff he was doing at that time. It's full of quips and it's just him dispatching one villain after another while making jokes about it. But it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Richard Dawson from Family Feud, the host of Family Feud, is the villain.
Oh, I see.
And he's great.
Because this is kind of a send-up of game shows,
yeah.
right? Like, is that the idea of The Running Man? It's sort of a send-up of game shows and sort of presages like reality
The Most Dangerous
TV.
Game.
And it's, the Most Dangerous Game and all that.
It's a TV game show where they take convicts and give them their chance to win their freedom by evading these trained killers / hunters who try to track them down in the city and murder them on live television while people place bets about it.
And now, of course, we don't have any reality TV quite like that, but it's another instance of Stephen King kind of being very somewhat prescient. Obviously, we don't have anything
that premise
like
is
that,
pretty close to the book, but the execution is absolutely nothing like
well, when you have
the
Arnold
book.
involved,
It's
all bets
super 80s. It has it features, get this, the Solid Gold Dancers are in The Running Man.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's pretty
They're like the Running
fantastic.
Man dancers.
I kind of love that. Okay.
Yeah, you should see it.
I should. That
it's
sounds
a lot
really
of fun.
fun.
I mean, it's really dumb and bad, but it's super enjoyable.
Well,
it's hard not to be entertained by it.
You know, I love the Solid Gold Dancers, so I'm in.
So then finally in 89, nothing in 88, but in 89, the decade wraps up with Pet Sematary.
Yeah.
Directed by Mary Lambert, who is the rare kind of woman director who was making horror films
at
that time.
Oh, okay.
Especially big budget horror films, like big studio releases.
What else has she made?
Not a lot, I think, unfortunately. I think
That's
like many women directors of that era, that she struggled to find work in the big budget mainstream.
I just know I've heard her name, so maybe it's
I think she did the sequel. I think she's done a lot of music videos, like really famous music videos. Mm-hmm. But I'd have to look her up to tell you what other films she's made. I can't even think of any off the top of my head. I think she might have made the sequel to this. I think she did Pet Sematary 2, maybe.
Okay.
But I might be wrong about that. But yeah, Pet Sematary is a very mean-spirited movie based on a very mean-spirited book, and it's got a real edge to it. It's not particularly fun.
Yeah. I think I did finally see this with you, and it's a little rough.
Fred Gwynne from the Munsters plays the old guy who kind of knows the story of the cemetery.
He's sort of like almost like a caretaker, but I'm not sure what he's a caretaker of exactly, but he's that kind of character. Yeah.
Yeah. It's
a lot of children in peril.
Yeah. It was a rare remake that was probably better than the original.
I don't think I saw the remake. John Lithgow's in that, though,
yeah,
right?
John Lithgow plays the Fred Gwynne part. Yeah. Pet Sematary is remembered by, I think, most people who remember it at all for this one particular scene. Mm-hmm. And the book is kind of the same way. At least for me, that scene in the book was the scarring scene. Yeah. But essentially, it's the female lead character, who in the movie is played by Denise Crosby from
shout out
Star
TNG.
Trek.
Yeah.
Has this traumatic memory from her childhood of having to take care of her sister, who her parents didn't really take care of, who had, I think it was scoliosis and some other problems, and was hidden away in this bedroom upstairs, and was she just has this scary memory of having to like take food up to this sister. Yeah. And who was in bad shape. It's just the way King describes it in the book, it's just kind of, it's not something that should be terrifying at all, really. It's just sad. But man, the way he writes about it and the way it's shot in the film, they used a male actor to play the sister, for one thing. A dancer who like could control the contortions of their body. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just very problematic.
I remember finding out, because I remember you telling me and hearing that there was this like one thing about Pet Sematary that was just the scariest ever. And I remember being really surprised to find out what it ultimately was, because it had nothing to do with scary animals, which was what I expected. But that movie's all about things coming back to life, right? Or things coming back to haunt you, essentially. So yeah.
So that's King in the 80s. Like there was a lot. There's some really good ones and some real lowlights.
Again, sublime and ridiculous.
Sure. I mean, I would say if you're not a big horror person, you should at least see Stand By Me.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
And a lot of these are pretty mild, especially by the standard of today's horror movies. Like there's nothing in Cat's Eye that's going to scare you.
I mean, scary only not because they're gross, but because it's like, wow, imagine I was in this situation. That would be horrible. Yeah. Like that kind of thing.
And The Dead Zone is more of a thriller. Christine is not really scary.
No.
I mean, none of these are that scary.
Everyone, I'm still not a horror person. And
she likes all these movies.
I like all these things. Yeah. They're all great.
Yeah. And of course, they're still continuing to adapt him like no other writer.
Yeah.
He's probably the most adapted writer.
I wonder if that's
out
true.
There.
Could be. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for going down this trip down memory lane.
Yep. Stephen King
Avenue. Mm-hmm. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time. You've been listening to The Long Rewind. The program is produced by Dustin Morrow and hosted by me, Lisa Molinelli. If you enjoy the show, please consider hitting the subscribe button, leave us a good review on your podcast app, and tell your friends about the program. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.